Alright, recording should be going. Hello everyone, Shin here. As you can probably tell already, this is not a normal build video. This is a very informal, very impromptu one. I was hoping to have a balance patch today and be able to see if anything major changed with Spellbreaker that would change the build and, make me have to change up stuff that I use and whatnot, but unfortunately there was not. But I still wanted to bring you guys the video and bring you guys something to chew on and something to mess around with while we wait for the balance patch to come. So this is going to be the informal version of all the stuff for the build I've been using and having a lot of fun with. When the balance patch actually hits, and I'm actually able to see everything that's changed or hasn't changed, then I'll do my normal, high quality, formal build guide video that you guys are used to on this channel. This is my stream setup for how things are presented, but I'm not actually streaming right now. I'm looking over to the right because that's my recording stuff, and I want to make sure it's not breaking. And also, there will probably be a lot of ums and ahs and pauses and all that. I typically cut a lot of this extra fluff out when I'm doing a proper build video, but this isn't a proper build video. This is a very impromptu one. That being said, I'm not going to waste any more time. I'm going to get you guys the build right now, and I need to stop hitting the wrong buttons. I have been using this build in all three modes, so I will go over what all the differences are between the different modes. I'm not going to move from PvP just because I can kind of go through everything here. But starting out with PvP, since we're in here. Alright, so here's the build. I'll do the amulet and all that in a sec. It's Strength, Discipline, and Spellbreaker for all three modes. Those three trait lines don't change. This is a very high damage, glass, bursty build, so there's really no space for defense. It's very in your face, very high risk, high reward. If you're interested in gameplay, feel free to check out some of the more recent videos on the channel. I've got a bunch of gameplay that you can take a look at. For the proper build video, I'll do my normal inclusion of, gameplay footage and all that, and I'll talk about the playstyle a bit more, but this is just giving you guys a baseline to start with while we all wait for the balance patch. So for Strength and Discipline, these traits aren't really going to change much, if at all. Actually, they're not going to change at all between the game modes. Strength, you're going to want to run Peak Performance, Forceful Greatsword, and Might Makes Right. Like I said, a lot of stuff I normally cut out. Might Makes Right, this is what a lot of the build's survivability actually centers around, because it builds a lot of might very quickly, and that in turn gives you a lot of endurance and a lot of dodges. It allows you to move around a lot. It also allows you to take advantage of Reckless Dodge quite a bit for a lot of extra damage, a lot of extra bursts. It's very handy for getting behind all of the blocks we've got flying around, especially with Guardians and, say, other Spellbreakers and all that. We've got Forceful Greatsword because it does use Greatsword, but also because it synergizes very well with Might Makes Right. It gives you a lot of extra dodge capability while you're on your Greatsword. And then Peak Performance. For World of World and PvE, it's got the utility of having the fall damage reduction and the AoE tied to that, but the main reason you take this is because you're running Bull's Charge. I'll get into the utilities in a sec, but that's what you need to know for now, is Peak Performance is mainly there just because you have Bull's Charge. Discipline, it's the pretty standard Warrior Sprint, Brawler's Recovery, and Heightened Focus. If you're not really keen on Heightened Focus, you can run Burst Mastery, but I personally like this setup. Having that extra quickness on there is nice for getting your heal off quickly, getting more damage out more quickly. It's nice to be able to do things faster with this build. You want to get more damage out more quickly so you can spike down your targets faster. Alright, down in Spellbreaker, most of the time... Well, I shouldn't say most of the time. It really depends on what you want to do. The second two traits you want to keep as they are. Magebane Tether primarily is there to synergize with Might Makes Right again and generate a bunch of might, which in turn generates a bunch of endurance, which means you can dodge more and do all that fun stuff, get more damage out. But also, it's nice for just the extra damage that Might provides. It's great for keeping people in range, keeping people from running away. It's great for dealing with thieves and mesmers who like to stealth and run away. And it's a nice utility that also synergizes really well with Might Makes Right. Sun and Moon style is kind of a given because this build also runs 2 daggers on the offset. Not really much to say about it. It's a little bit of extra healing. The healing is kind of negligible. It's mainly the quickness that's nice. Again, doing things more quickly allows you to get more damage out, get more healing and whatnot. If you really don't like Sun and Moon style for whatever reason, you can honestly run any of the traits in this middle section. They're all fine for the build, but I personally like Sun and Moon style just because it uses 2 daggers. Why not take the dagger trait? For the adept, this is where I jump around a little bit. In PvP, I like to run No Escape, just because this will proc off a full counter, and you're dealing with people on a point, so it's typically nice to just have that immobilize there so you can catch up to... You can close whatever small gap is between you and your target on the point, and you can continue your damage. WvW and PvE. PvE, I would definitely recommend not taking No Escape because there's no... You don't really need to emote things because they typically stay in your face anyway. In WvW, you can, you don't have to. It's a flavor thing. Honestly, it's a flavor thing and a utility thing in WvW. It's if you want to have that immobilize. I've tested it with and without in WvW. It works fine either way. I've kind of just kept it on just because it seems nice. But, that being said, Pure Strike is also nice. I haven't tested this in PvP, but I have tested it in WvW. It's very nice for just adding more damage on top of your already impressive spike potential. This is the go-to for the PvE version. PvP, you can use it as well if you're willing to give up the immob on the daze. On the daze and stun, I should say. This No Escape only procs off of your dagger and your, I should say your dagger 3. Right here, your disrupting stab, and only procs off of that and your full counter. So if you feel like having those 2 things, only procking it is not worth taking it, feel free to go with Pure Strike. It's more damage. It suits the build just fine. Either one's good. I wouldn't recommend guard counter because this build doesn't really focus around full counter at all. Full counter in this build is more for disruption and defense. It's not meant to be a brunt of your damage. Okay, so that's the build. In PvP, PvE, and WvW, what I've got at the moment is pretty much what you can go with. It's perfectly fine for each of the modes. In PvP and WvW, you can switch out Pure Strike for No Escape, depending on how much extra CC you want. So that's the traits. For the PvP setup, I prefer Berserker Amulet with Evasion Runes. The combo, I shouldn't say the combo of the 2, but Berserker Amulet, it's more damage, it's raw damage. Numbers in PvP aren't so ridiculous that you have to run something like, say, Marauder or Demolisher. You can run Berserker and do just fine. That's what I run 100% of the time in PvP is Berserker Amulet with this build. It's just damage, and that's the whole point of this build, is jump on people and blow them up. The Rune of Evasion, I like this because I can take advantage of it with all the dodging I've got going on. It's kind of an extra bonus on top of Reckless Dodge. Granted, all the cooldowns are a bit longer than Reckless Dodge, but with how often I'm seeing their effects, I feel it's perfectly fine to use them. Let's restart that thought, sorry. I like Rune of Evasion because this build has so many dodges, and it's just nice to have extra things like the Cripple, you get the Fury, you get the Swiftness. It's nice to have. If you don't like Rune of Evasion, you can switch this out for Rune of Strength. That's good for all the extra might you've got going on. It gives you more damage. You can switch it out for Rune of Surging. That will synergize well with your Elite. You can mess around with the runes. I just like using Rune of Evasion just because it's what I've been using. It adds extra stuff on top of Reckless Dodge, and it's just... I've noticed it giving me a lot of extra stuff, for lack of a better term. Again, very impromptu, very informal. I'll be a lot more verbose and a lot more to the point when I actually make the proper build video. So weapons, greatsword, dagger. That goes for all 3 modes. In PvP, use Sigil of Courage and Sigil of Battle on both. The whole theme of this build is basically stack as much might as you can to get as many dodges as you can, to get as many reckless dodges as you can, and just get as much damage as you can. Like, it's basically take a glass build and make it as glass as possible, or give it as much damage as possible. Yeah, that's those. It's might on hit and might on swap for both sets. It's more might. So that's the PvP stuff. For utilities, actually I'll go into utilities last because they probably switched the most between the different modes. So that was the PvP stats. For World v World stats, you can use full Zerk everything. I was using that for a good while and I was having success with it. However, after some testing in World v World, I tried out some Marauder armor, and that ended up getting me just a little bit extra survivability, which allowed me to stay in fights for just long enough to actually stick to people and down them faster than they could down me. Running full Zerk in World v World, I noticed with everyone running Ascended stuff, I went down a lot more, and it was harder to stay alive. So switching to the Marauder stuff seemed to help alleviate that by a fair amount. All of the trinkets are still Berserker. Back piece you could have as Marauder as well. But I switched all the armor to Marauder, and it seemed to work out nicely. Runes, I noticed with Strength I was able to do a lot of damage, but after swapping it to Durability, I was still able to do roughly the same amount of damage, but I had a lot more sustain because of the extra toughness, the boons I got out of it, and the extra health. So you probably want to go with Durability runes in World v World. Strength is just fine too if you really want to go with it. This build doesn't use shield or any sort of real block, so I wouldn't recommend like defenders if you like that kind of interplay between blocking and stacking might and all that. Plus it doesn't use defense, so it's kind of a moot point anyway. For the sigils, Air and Hydromancy in the Greatsword, and I'm using Draining and Severance in my daggers. You could switch out Severance for Air if you don't want to rely on interrupts as much. However, these 2 interrupt sigils have been proving to be pretty nice for dealing with people, because you don't run into a lot of stability in roaming in World v World from what I've seen. And when you do, as long as you play it smart with your interrupts, you can actually strip the stability off first and then interrupt them, and you'll get the effects of both sigils. So those are what I run. If you don't like leaning on your interrupts so much, you can switch out Severance for Air. You could probably also switch out Draining for Fire if you really like, or vice versa, whatever. I do highly recommend doing Air and Hydromancy in the Greatsword, though. Hydromancy is an amazing sigil for power builds because of both the chill, but mainly the bursts of damage you get out of it. And then Air is just nice extra damage. Okay, so that's the gear. In PvE, I would say go full Zerker everything, and for your runes, go Strength runes. You could technically do Scholar in PvE as well, but if you don't want to mess around with switching runes, or like you don't have legendary armor and you can't swap things, I would say run Strength. It's pretty universally applicable to both PvE and World v World. You can run Durability too in PvE. You just won't quite have the same level damage that you can have out there. But as I just mentioned, like, you still have very good damage even with Durability runes. So feel free to run Durability in PvE. Okay, so that's the World v World stats. That's the PvP stats. That's the traits. Utilities. This is where things probably change the most, and even then, they don't really change that much. Okay, PvP. Basically, the traits I've got on at the moment. Natural Healing is a very big heal that cleanses all the condies, and with all the conditions flying around in PvP right now, it's very nice to have. This build isn't really built around sustained fights like the meta variant that's going on right now with like heal sig and resistance for days and shield and all that. This is very much a get in, blow someone up, and get out build, or something that doesn't want to have the focus on it. So running natural healing will allow you to basically survive the big spikes that'll happen, big, Connie spikes or damage spikes or whatever. If you were to run heal sig, you would not be able to recover quickly enough because it doesn't have things like adrenal health, it doesn't have shield, it doesn't have things that will allow healing signet to work. So it's best to just take the big burst heal so you can go in, do what you need to do. If you take a bunch of damage, get out, heal up, and then go back in. In other words, heal sig is too slow for this build. For the utilities themselves, Balance Stance and Berserker Stance seem to give me the most success. I tried running Featherfoot Grace in PvP, and there was too much CC for me to really be able to do anything. I would get CC'd by something, pop Featherfoot Grace, and then I'd be CC'd again, and I wouldn't have anything left. So the stability is very nice to have. Even if it gets corrupted or removed or whatever, it's still a stance, so it still ticks stability periodically. It's only if you're in a really nasty corruption spot that you won't get anything out of this. But having that also allows you to continue to do your damage, continue to move around, and hit the people you want to hit without being CC'd. Berserker Stance is, again, related to conditions. It's kind of a necessity thing. You need to be able to get in and survive whatever conditions are flying around. Endure Pain doesn't last long enough, and the burst healing you can get from natural healing plus the mobility that this build has can pretty much take care of all the power damage that you'll be dealing with, or at least a lot of it. You'll be able to mitigate it with skill usage and positioning, whereas conditions, once they're on you, and you can't do anything about it. So you kind of need Berserker Stance, or at least I've found this build needs Berserker Stance to really survive a lot of those brawls. Even if you can dodge all the power stuff, you still need defense against the conditions. And then the third one, and this is probably one of your best offensive tools in this setup other than your weapons, is Bull's Charge. It's great for mobility, it's great for damage, it's great for CC, it's great for defense. It's just nice to have, nice for moving around and hitting your targets, and it's just a nice utility, and it's very handy with a build like this for maneuvering the battlefield and then picking your target and getting to them and knocking them down and blowing them up. Not much else to say about it. If you really don't like Bull's Charge, for whatever reason, feel free to go Restorative Strength and put on the other stance, but I highly recommend running what I've got. So that's that. Utility is Signature Rage because of all the aforementioned might synergy. Also, Fury for a good while, which is more crits, which is more damage. It's more damage. And then Swiftness doesn't hurt. You can run Rampage, but I wouldn't recommend it. Honestly, Signature Rage it synergizes way too well with this build to not run it. Okay, so that's utilities for PvP. For World v World, I would say swap out Berserker Stance for Endure Pain. This is because you typically run into more power builds in World v World than Condi. They still exist out there, and if you find yourself in a matchup where you've got a bunch of roamers that have Condi, then feel free to use Berserker Stance. But Endure Pain is nice for the power damage reduction, and it's another stun break, so it allows you to further survive fights in World v World. I did try again with the stun break, the primary stun break over on the left. I tried running Featherfoot Grace. I ran into the same problem as with PvP, where I kept getting CC too much. So running Balance Stance in World v World as well. Not much. I explained that whole deal before. The heal is the same. Bull's Charge is the same. Signature Rage is the same. Like, between World v World and PvP, it's really just the stance changes, and even then, you may not want to change it depending on what you're running into. And then in PvE, this is where you do want to run Featherfoot Grace. Featherfoot Grace and probably Endure Pain. Mainly because unless you're running around like the Desolation or maybe Vabby, you don't really need defense against conditions, and any defense you do need against them, you've got natural healing for. So having Endure Pain for the extra stun break and the damage mitigation is nice for some of the mobs that will hit you very hard. So it's nice for that. And then Featherfoot Grace, the reason I suggest it for PvE is because you're not getting chain CC'd in PvE as much as you would in PvP or World v World. So it's fine to run it here. Plus it gives you a little bit more leverage against conditions, and it allows you to run quicker in combat because you get the super speed. Some mobs that like to dodge away from you, Jin come to mind. Having that super speed is nice for closing the gap. And yeah, that's the utilities in PvE. It's still natural healing and Signature Rage and Bull's Charge there as well. I guess for general playstyle, it's mainly engage with Greatsword, use Greatsword for all of its great, damage mitigation and range damage and big hits. Like Greatsword, for anyone who understands Warrior, is pretty self-explanatory. You use it to get in, deal a lot of damage, and then you use things like Whirlwind Attack to move yourself about and mitigate incoming damage. Keep in mind, your only ranged attack is going to be Blade Trail on the Greatsword. You do not have any ranged capability on your daggers. So if you have someone who's at medium range, you're going to have to hit them with Blade Trail. Otherwise, you have to close the gap. Otherwise, you primarily want to focus on CCing your target either with Disrupting Stab or Bull's Charge, and then hitting them with Wastrel's Ruin. This applies to all three modes. Your goal for dealing damage, other than general damage on the Greatsword, is CC and then Dagger 4. Because this thing hits very, very, very hard. I regularly crit for 10k plus with this thing. And then when you add all the might on top of it, it goes even higher. But yeah, that's the primary goal when you're on daggers, is to get in close, CC your target, and hit him with Wastrel's Ruin. Hit him with the Dagger 4, because that's going to be a big chunk of damage. And that's also great for securing kills, because it chunks a good majority of your target's health down. And then you can finish them off with any number of other tools. Dagger 5 is good for dealing with ranged targets, be it any of the Awakened mobs with bows, be it Dragon Hunters or Rangers in World v World and PvP. Anything that has a lot of range pressure, you have some defense against it on Blade Storm, but don't sit on this. Don't stay at range and try and reflect the projectiles. You want to be closing the gap with Blade Storm up, just so you can get in and be able to do the damage where you're actually able to deal it. And that leads me on to the next thing. This build is very weak against range pressure. Very weak against range pressure, especially when you can't close the gap. If you have someone who's up on a ledge and you have no quick way to get to them, they're going to get a bunch of free pressure on you, and you're not going to be able to do anything about it. So keep that in mind when playing this build. It's a very glass build that can delete people, but you have to get to them to delete them. You don't really have any sort of anti-range anything. Your Dagger auto attack is very strong. I highly recommend using this as a filler when you're not doing your 3-4 combo, or you're trying to go for a CC combo, or you're not on Greatsword. Use Signature Rage often for the extra Fury and the extra Might. Dodge a lot. A lot of this build's damage comes from Reckless Dodge, so keep dodging. Remember that all of your CCs and your Dagger, your Dagger burst skill will remove boons. So use that to your advantage. Get rid of stability, get rid of Aegis, get rid of protection. Get rid of all the things that are going to prevent you from killing your target. Full counter is, like I mentioned earlier, mainly used for defensive reasons and for disruption. This you're not really going to want to use as a main damage source. You want to use this when, say, you expect a big hit of damage, say the Dragon Hunter Longbow 2, or something from a Deadeye, or Backstab. It's just any any big incoming hit or anything that you see as being a problem, use full counter. You can also just kind of use it whenever it's up. Just don't waste it. Full counter is one of the few defensive tools this build has, so use it accordingly. Another good use for this is if you're in PvP and you are surrounded by enemies who are trying to res, or overworld for that matter. If you're in a situation where you have someone down and they have an ally going to res them, try to go in near both targets, pop full counter. More than likely, the down person is going to be down to autoing you, and that will let you proc full counter and interrupt whomever is trying to res them. Alternatively, if they either survive the interrupt and because they get disability or whatever, and they're still rezzing, you can then use a bunch of other CCs like Dagger 3 or Bull's Charge or whatever to deal with them. But full counter is a good tool for dealing with that initially. Also, it's nice for team fights where you can just get in, pop it, run into, say, an AoE or someone's pet, or get in front of someone and proc it. I know that's considered kind of cheesy, but it's how the mechanic works right now. I use it all. I use that mechanic all the time. Use it to your advantage while it still works as it is. Other than that, it's kind of just a defensive tool. Try to not be in a situation where you have to pop full counter to survive something at range. Try to be in melee, in your lethal range, as much as you possibly can with full counter, because otherwise it's kind of just, it blocks one hit and that's all you got. And then a quick reminder, Arcane Slice will hit for as much as tier 3 on Core Warrior, even if you only have tier 1, which means it hits as hard as tier 3 Core on Spellbreaker. Don't worry about how much adrenaline you got. As long as you can use Arcane Slice, it's a lot of damage. So keep that in mind. It's also great for AoE cleave. And that is pretty much it for the build stuff. Again, I will be doing a proper build video for this, going over everything I've gone here once the balance patch actually comes out, but that hasn't happened yet, so I wanted to give you guys something to chew on, or some sort of information about the build before then, because I was waiting to do it today, or waiting for the balance patch today so then I could do the proper video, but it didn't happen, so I'm like, whatever, I'll just make an impromptu video giving you guys the info, and then I'll do the nice fancy formal version that you guys are used to when the balance patch actually comes out and I'm able to test things and see what has or hasn't changed. So, alright, thanks for watching, and I will catch you either in the next video or around the stream. Take care, guys.